Hi, Redditors. I, 28 female, and my husband, 31 male, have been happily married for 2 years now. But every time we talk about our wedding, it's impossible not to laugh, mostly because my aunt, whom we'll call Aunt B, tried every possible way to ruin it. It's like a comedy of errors, except her errors were malicious, calculated, and downright absurd. Let me start with some context. My husband and I met through mutual friends and clicked instantly. He's smart, kind, and comes from a great family. But what truly sealed the deal was how he won over my dad. You see, I belong from a part of the world where society is old-fashioned and believes that parents should select a child's spouse. Hence, initially, my own father wasn't thrilled about me finding my own partner, but my husband's charm and respect eventually melted his reservations. Mom, however, knew what Aunt B was capable of. Aunt B is Dad's older sister, and she thrives on drama and control. My mom decided to keep our engagement a secret until everything was finalized. And when Aunt B found out, let's just say the gloves came off. Aunt B was livid that I had chosen my own husband. She stormed into our house, accusing my parents of letting me ruin family traditions. She claimed it was my dad's duty to stop the wedding. But my dad, who had come to love my husband, didn't budge. That's when she switched tactics. First, she tried to brainwash my brothers. She pulled them aside during family gatherings and tried convincing them that my husband wasn't good enough for me. He's probably just pretending to be nice, she said. These boys always have hidden agendas. My brothers, thankfully, weren't swayed. They knew him and liked him. The next weekend, we hosted a dinner for both families to meet officially. Aunt B attended, and for the first time, she met my husband's parents. The moment she learned that he came from a wealthy family, he was the heir to a multi-million-dollar business, her demeanor changed. Suddenly, she was all smiles, showering them with compliments. At the same dinner, she called her daughter, Kay, and asked her to join us. Kay, who is disliked by all the cousins for her arrogance, arrived and immediately began monopolizing the conversation. Aunt B started bragging about Kay's imaginary achievements, her non-existent business, her brilliant skills, and how she'd be the perfect daughter-in-law for any family. It was bizarre and awkward. I knew she's up to something, but decided to wait until her true intentions reveals. That dinner marked the start of Aunt B's campaign of chaos. As we were wrapping up the evening, she made it her mission to charm my fiancé's parents. She showered them with compliments about their home, praised their son endlessly, and then casually introduced her daughter, who had just arrived. Her daughter, Kay, strutted in with an air of arrogance that could make anyone cringe. Aunt B launched into a monologue about how exceptional Kay was. "She's an incredible businesswoman," she said, gesturing dramatically. "She manages everything with such grace, and she's also excellent at home management. Truly the full package." My fiancé's parents exchanged polite smiles, but I could sense their discomfort. At first, I thought Aunt B's behavior was just her being over the top as usual. But the next evening, my future mother-in-law called me. She sounded tense. "Can you meet me tomorrow?" she asked. "There's something I need to discuss in person." When we met, her expression told me everything. She was worried, and what she told me made my blood boil. Aunt B had visited their house earlier that day, bringing Kay along. She had shared old family secrets, exaggerated petty dramas from years ago, and fabricated stories about my past. "She said you've had relationships before this," my future mother-in-law said hesitantly, "and that you might be after our money." I felt sick. Not only had Aunt B tarnished my reputation, but she had also fabricated lies to paint me as a gold digger. I went straight home and told my parents everything. My mom was livid, and my dad, though reluctant to confront his sister, agreed it was time to set things straight. When Aunt B arrived at our house later that evening, we called her out. She denied everything, feigning hurt and claiming I was trying to ruin her reputation. "You've always hated me," she snapped. "And now you're just being a spoiled brat because you don't want me involved." The argument escalated, but nothing was resolved. Aunt B left in a huff and we were left reeling. I was heartbroken, angry, and unsure of how to proceed. My fiancé was supportive, reassuring me that none of this would change his feelings. Still, the damage Aunt B had done couldn't be undone so easily. Unfortunately, this wasn't the end of her antics. It was only the beginning. The dust had barely settled from Aunt B's accusations when she came up with another plan to derail my wedding. A few days later, my fiancé called me, sounding uneasy. "You won't believe this," he said. "Kay showed up outside my office today." I was stunned. What was she doing there? She said she was in the area visiting a friend, but the friend wasn't answering her calls. So she asked me if I'd join her for lunch while she waited. Hearing this made my stomach churn. I knew Kay wasn't just in the area. This was calculated, just like everything else Aunt B did. My fiancé thankfully handled it well. He made up an excuse about being busy and left, but it was clear he was uncomfortable. Over the next few days, Kay found small ways to bump into him, at the gym, at coffee shops, even near his workplace. Each time she acted overly friendly, and it was obvious she was trying to get closer to him. My fiancé told me about every encounter, and while I trusted him completely, I couldn't ignore how unsettling this was. The final straw came a week before the wedding. With all the functions about to start, Aunt B decided to pull her most audacious stunt yet. She arrived at our house uninvited, demanding to speak with my dad. She claimed that her daughter had developed feelings for my fiancé and that it would be disrespectful to continue the wedding. "You need to cancel this," she said with all the arrogance in the world. "My daughter is perfect for him. It's your duty as the younger brother to respect my wishes." I couldn't help but laugh at her audacity, but my dad wasn't amused. "You've crossed the line," he said firmly. "This is my daughter's wedding, and it's going to happen whether you like it or not." The tension in the house was palpable. My brothers, who had been patient until now, were done with Aunt B's antics. They made it clear she wasn't welcome at any of the events if she continued this behavior. Aunt B, furious at being called out, stormed out of the house. But this wasn't the end of her schemes. As the wedding day approached, she became even more determined to sabotage everything. As the wedding day grew closer, Aunt B's antics escalated to a level no one could have predicted. She was determined to cause chaos, and she didn't care who got hurt in the process. A few days before the functions began, I was busy finalizing last-minute details with my mom and cousins. Everything was coming together beautifully, and I was starting to feel the excitement. But that afternoon, one of my cousins pulled me aside, her face pale with worry. "You won't believe what I just saw," she whispered. "Aunt B was in your room cutting your blouse." I froze. "What?" "She's cut huge slashes into it." "It's ruined," she said, anger flickering in her eyes. I ran to my room, and there it was. My wedding blouse, the one I'd spent months designing, completely destroyed. My heart sank and tears welled up in my eyes. My mom rushed in, and without missing a beat, grabbed an old blouse from another outfit. With the help of our tailor, she managed to make it work. But the incident left me shaken. When confronted, Aunt B denied everything as usual. "Why would I do something like that?" she said, feigning innocence. "You're just looking for excuses to blame me." But her actions didn't stop there. On the day of the wedding, she tried one last time to manipulate my fiancé. She cornered him at the venue before the ceremony, spinning more lies about me. She claimed I wasn't trustworthy and begged him to reconsider. Thankfully, my fiancé wasn't swayed. He politely but firmly told her to leave him alone. At this point, her husband, who had been quietly enduring her antics, was mortified. My brothers were equally fed up and decided enough was enough. They confronted her, demanding that she leave the venue immediately. Her husband finally stepped in, dragging her out of the hall despite her protests. She tried every possible argument to stay at the event, to the point she started running here and there to avoid getting caught by her husband. Literally all of my cousins and maternal aunts and uncles were laughing like crazy, but Aunt B didn't even felt a drop of embarrassment. It wasn't her husband finally caught her and literally dragged her out of the venue. Later that evening, Aunt B tried to sneak out of her house and was leaving for my wedding venue, but she wasn't alone. She was bringing a bottle of petrol along her, so we all knew what was up to. My wedding was supposed to be a joyful occasion, yet here she was, plotting something so extreme it sounded like a bad soap opera. Luckily, karma intervened before she could execute her plan. On her way to the venue, Aunt B met a car accident and fractured her leg badly. She was rushed to the hospital, and the wedding continued without further interruption. I'll admit, the news of her accident brought a wave of relief. It was like the universe had stepped in to protect me. On the most important day of my life, the ceremony went off beautifully. Despite all the chaos leading up to it, my fiancé and I exchanged vows surrounded by our loved ones. The venue was breathtaking, the food was exquisite, and the happiness on my parents' faces made everything worth it. For the first time in weeks, I felt at peace. That night, during the reception, I couldn't stop thinking about Aunt B's relentless efforts to sabotage everything. From introducing her daughter to my in-laws as the perfect match, to slandering my name and damaging my wedding attire, she had done everything in her power to ruin my day. Yet, despite her best efforts, I had won. After the wedding, word spread about her accident. The story of Aunt B's grand scheme and her subsequent fall became a running joke in the family. Even my husband couldn't stop laughing whenever we talked about it. "She really thought she could burn down the wedding," he'd say, shaking his head. Talk about taking things too far. But while we found humor in her failed attempts, I couldn't completely ignore the bitterness I felt. Aunt B had tried to destroy my special day, and for what? Jealousy? Pride? Whatever her reasons, her actions had left a mark. In the weeks following the wedding, my family decided to take a stand. Aunt B's behavior had gone too far, and it was time to set boundaries. My brothers banned her from attending any future family events, and her husband, embarrassed by her antics, supported the decision. As for Kay, she disappeared from the scene entirely. She stopped showing up at gatherings and avoided any contact with my husband or his family. It was clear that Aunt B's schemes had backfired spectacularly, leaving her and her daughter humiliated. After the wedding chaos, life finally started settling down. My husband and I moved into our new home, and for the first time in months, we could focus on our lives together without Aunt B's interference. However, the aftermath of her actions still lingered. My mother, still fuming over the blouse incident and the petrol stunt, refused to speak to her sister. "She's burned her bridges," Mom said. "I don't care if she's family. What she did was unforgivable." My dad, usually one to brush off drama, was equally stern. "She jeopardized my daughter's happiness. That's not something I can overlook," he declared. Meanwhile, Aunt B's fractured leg kept her bedridden for months, which meant she couldn't attend any family gatherings. Her absence brought a strange sense of peace. For once, there were no whispered insults. No passive-aggressive comments, no scheming. It was as if a dark cloud had lifted. Kay, on the other hand, went completely off the radar. She stopped attending family events and unfollowed everyone on social media, including me and my husband. I later learned through mutual connections that she had tried to move on by dating someone new, but her arrogance and attitude made it difficult for her to maintain relationships. My in-laws, especially my mother-in-law, were incredibly supportive during this time. She even joked about Aunt B's antics, saying, "At least now we know your family isn't boring." But deep down, I knew the incident had left her wary. She became more cautious about who she trusted, which was a sad but understandable consequence. As for my husband, he handled the situation with grace. Despite being the target of Aunt B and Kay's schemes, he never let it affect his love or respect for me. "You're the only person I want," he told me one evening as we reminisced about the drama. No amount of manipulation could ever change that. Looking back, I realized that Aunt B's actions, while hurtful, had only strengthened the bond between my husband and me. It reminded us of what really mattered: love, trust, and the unwavering support of the people who truly cared about us. But just when I thought the drama was over, Aunt B made one final attempt to insert herself back into our lives. What she did next would leave us shaking our heads in disbelief once again. Just as life was beginning to feel normal again, Aunt B decided to make another move. I should have known she wouldn't stay quiet for long. But this time, her approach was downright baffling. One afternoon, my mom received a long-winded message from Aunt B, claiming she was ready to bury the hatchet and wanted to make amends. "Family is everything," she wrote. "I hate seeing us divided like this. Let's put the past behind us." Mom showed me the message, her expression unreadable. "What do you think?" she asked. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to believe Aunt B was sincere, but after everything she'd done, forgiveness didn't come easy. Still, I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt. "Maybe she's finally realized the damage she's caused," I said cautiously. A week later, Aunt B invited the entire family to a lunch she hosted at her house. My husband and I were hesitant, but my mom insisted we go, hoping it would give her sister a chance to apologize in person. Reluctantly, we agreed. When we arrived, Aunt B greeted us with a wide smile that felt anything but genuine. She acted overly sweet, gushing about how happy she was to see us. But as the afternoon went on, her true colors started to show. At one point, she pulled my husband aside for a private chat. I didn't think much of it until he returned, looking visibly uncomfortable. "What did she say?" I asked. "She offered me a business partnership with Kay," he said, shaking his head. "She said it would be a great way to bring the family closer." I was livid. After everything that had happened, Aunt B still had the audacity to push her daughter into our lives. It was clear her apology was nothing more than a calculated move to further her own agenda. My husband and I left the lunch early, and that night we decided we'd had enough. Aunt B's manipulative behavior wasn't going to change, and we refused to let her disrupt our lives any longer. But just as we were ready to cut ties for good, Aunt B pulled one last stunt that left everyone in shock. The very next day, we woke up to a storm of phone calls from relatives. Apparently, Aunt B had taken it upon herself to circulate an elaborate story about my husband and me. According to her, we had embarrassed the family by rejecting her generous olive branch and that my husband had promised to help Kay but had cruelly backed out. To make matters worse, Aunt B claimed that my husband had been flirting with Kay during the lunch and that I had stormed out in jealousy. The audacity of her lies was almost impressive. My mother-in-law was the first to call. "Is this true?" she asked, her voice calm but concerned. I quickly assured her it was all nonsense and explained what had really happened at the lunch. Thankfully, she believed us, but the damage had already been done. Other relatives were now questioning our integrity, and Aunt B was reveling in the chaos she had created. That was the breaking point. My husband and I decided to cut all contact with Aunt B and Kay for good. My parents supported the decision, and even my dad, who had always been the peacemaker, admitted she's beyond redemption. But Aunt B wasn't done. A few days later, she showed up unannounced at my parents' house, demanding to speak with my dad. She claimed she had been misunderstood and that we were all overreacting. When my dad refused to entertain her, she lost her temper and started shouting about how ungrateful we all were. Her husband, who had been growing increasingly distant from her antics, finally stepped in. "Enough is enough," he said firmly. "You're tearing this family apart, and I won't be part of it anymore." He escorted her out of the house, leaving her fuming on the front lawn. In the weeks that followed, Aunt Bee's reputation within the family took a massive hit. Relatives who had once defended her began to see her for who she really was, a manipulative, self-centered woman who thrived on drama. As for me and my husband, we focused on moving forward. We refused to let Aunt Bee's toxicity overshadow our happiness. But every now and then, when we recounted the chaos she caused, we couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. In the end, Aunt Bee's schemes only brought my husband and me closer together. Her attempts to tear us apart had backfired spectacularly, leaving her isolated and humiliated. It wasn't the ending she wanted, but it was exactly what she deserved.